Time, I think.
Oh,
Hey everyone, it's Brian here from Massey's Main Entertainment. I want to welcome everybody back to the channel. It's been kind of a weird season for me in tennis with the weather kind of bouncing around, but I do manage to try to get these videos out from time to time. And today I got a very special day because I got a very special guest. Someone I consider an absolute legend when it comes to like music writing and being critical of music in general, and that's Mr. Colin Larkin. If you've ever gone down the rabbit hole of listening to music or in studying music in any way, I'm sure that you've run across his name many times. He's an author of the Encyclopedia of Popular Music, monumental reference that helped shape how we think about modern music. And of course, the iconic all-time top 1,000 albums, a book that sparked countless debates, I'm sure, in every type of situation, inspired collections, and introduced people like myself to music that I might have otherwise, neglected in some way. So today, I just look at it like we're just going to have a good old-fashioned conversation, get into Colin's journey a little bit through this, and story behind his lists and the process of the rankings and things like that. And Colin, thank you so much for joining me. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. I really
hey,
appreciate it.
great. No, really happy to do it. You've been in touch with me over the last few years while you've been looking at these, listening to these albums. I'm so impressed with the journey you're on because that's pretty good, to
Yeah.
work your way through. That's it. Okay.
Sometimes, it's not like you're going to always like everything. And I'm saying to people, there's good and bad examples, I think, of every genre out there. And, but I think it's good to stretch those muscles. I don't think enough people do that. They don't stretch those music muscles a little bit,
Yeah. Yeah.
so.
Yeah. I quite agree with you. You're absolutely right.
I guess, we kind of start a little bit for like maybe I don't know if this would be at the beginning, but where did your love of music begin? And like, was there a particular
Yeah.
album or situation?
A situation that I now know for certain why my passion and obsession for music started so early and continued so early and was slightly different from family and friends. My parent, I was born in East London, in Essex border, East London, and we were very poor. And to subsidise my dad's income, he had worked on a fairground since he was very young, and he was nearly 40 when I was born, but he continued before I was born, after the war, to work on a travelling fair. Now, he wasn't a showman and he wasn't born into that style, but he just did that when he was a very poor child. So from the moment I was born, which was at the end of 49, I was carried, wrapped up every weekend, every bank holiday, most holidays. My mother and my father worked on the fair, and we slept in the caravan initially. So my musical journey started. I was born in the end of 49, but by 1953, I absolutely know for certain that I was listening to music. And the reason for that, as you probably know with all fairgrounds, is you move from one ride to another, and each ride is playing its own. Now, in those days, in 1953, it was obviously 78 RPM records. It was big old-fashioned tannoy speakers, and it was blisteringly loud and distorted as well. Now, the young girl who I thought was my sister who lived with us, she was actually the daughter of the fairground owner. She lived with us to go to school, and she worked in the Dodgems, in the booth where the Dodgems was. So I spent literally at 3 years of age, safe, going from the coconut shy where my mum worked to the roundabout, the little carousel which my dad ran, and then back to the Dodgems, into the booth. Now, that was it. That was the treasure chest, because I vividly remember those 45s. The music that was played, and this is worth mentioning because this did put me on the journey. The owner of the fair used to go down to the London docks, and the liners would be coming in from America, and he would buy regular times throughout the year. He would buy Pepsi Cola, which had, wasn't imported into Britain in those days. The actual hot dogs. We didn't know what a hot dog was. That was another American, post-war American thing. But the most important thing of all was the records, was the 78 records. Almost exclusively, they were black rhythm and blues, which were called race records. And so I was exposed to this remarkable music. Les Paul, Mary Ford also, Hank Williams in those early days. I can say, without shadow of the doubt, because the BBC, they never played any of this stuff. BBC was playing this really dodgy sort of light classical pop music, and British pop music, as you probably know, early 50s was in a real, there was nothing going on. So I know from the age of 3 onwards, I learnt what rhythm and blues, which of course came rock and roll. So that was the significant life-changing moment, which is why I've maintained this passion for the blues and rhythm and old rhythm and blues. So that was the journey. So from then on, I guess we're going to jump now, apart from Bobby V and Del Shannon. The next landmark is the Beatles. Hearing Love Me Do on the radio before it was released. And then going to school and talking to my friends. Did you hear that? That thing with the harmonica. Did you hear that? We thought it was black, obviously, until we saw a photograph in the New Musical Express, and we see they're all white because Lennon sounds black on that with that harmonica. So that was the other moment that I guess put me on this journey. And because I'm possibly a little bit OCD, in about 1962, I started collecting music magazines. And in those days, it was the Record Mirror, the Melody Maker, and New Musical Express. And sadly, I never threw one away until I started selling a few just a few years ago. So I then had accumulated a collection as well as a record collection. So all my pocket money went on a 45, which was 6 shillings and 8 pence. So I could probably get a record every 2 weeks. Wow. So the obsession had really dug in by the time I was 12. And then through the 60s, every year just seemed to get better and better and better. So we went through the beat music scene, and then the British blues boom, which came. There was the psych, 1967, there was the psych era. 68, what we called progressive blues. And 69, by 68 and 69, I had become completely obsessed with America. And totally, I don't know why it happened, but it happened. It started with Buffalo Springfield, and then it went Love, the Byrds, of course, Moby Grape, Quicksilver Messenger Service, Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane. And that, I guess I'm sort of stuck with that one as well. I still haven't grown up, basically. It seems like I'm talking a lot, but I'm getting on to work. I started writing about music in 1967 after I'd become an apprentice commercial artist. I wanted to be an artist. I couldn't be an artist because I'm not good enough. So I became like a book designer type. But alongside that, I got in a German. I went to Germany, and they seemed to appreciate that I knew what was going on with the music scene in '67. The word underground music was mentioned for the first time, And I was pretty keen on that. The Traffic were around at that time, and Males Bluesmakers were doing interesting things. Cream had just got going, and then I had all my San Francisco and LA bands that I could bore the pants off, everybody with. So they asked me if I would like to write an article, and I started to write in '67 for this magazine. Presents. So that got me my interest going. And as I progressed through, I became I went from being a book designer to a book publisher with my two partners. We started a book publishing company. Yeah. We were doing architecture and stuff and Oriental rugs. And I desperately wanted to. I wanted to do, because I was involved with a magazine at that time called Dark Star, and I wanted to do a book. And we were offered a book, and it was called Bob Dylan's Unreleased Recordings. This was in about '77. Nobody had ever published a book before on Dylan's bootlegs.
Really?
And we did it.
Even at that point?
We put it out.
Really?
Yeah, no, it was almost, this guy, Paul Cable, had researched, and we took, I got my partner, bless him, Len, I've sort of forced him into doing this book. And, it did really well. And we got an American deal as well out of it with Schirmer Books. So I knew that I wasn't a total muppet when it came to suggesting things that weren't to do with architecture. And then one of the great events in my life, meeting a friend, a lifelong friend, who wrote for the same magazine, a guy called Johnny Rogan, who sadly died a few years ago, but he was a lifelong buddy. For me, one of the greatest music biographers. So many books that he wrote. The world's leading expert on the Byrds, unquestionably, and just a wonderful, wonderful human being. And he offered us the very first book on the Byrds, which I desperately wanted to do, because the Byrds at that time couldn't get arrested, basically. We're talking 1978 now, I think, 79. So Crosby and Clark and Hillman had long gone, right. And it was McGuinn with the great Clarence White. But we did this book called Timeless Flight, and lo and behold, we sold 5,000 copies just like that. And then we did a reprint. That book subsequently has gone on now into 1, 2, 3, 4 editions with me, and then Johnny put it out as literally a doorstop of a book, like 800-900 pages long.
Wow.
So that's where it all started. When I came to the end of my partnership with my dear friend in the publishing company, I mean, I was getting a bit antsy, because I wanted to do music books exclusively, because I was writing about music. I was interviewing all my music heroes, for the magazine that I was writing for. And I knew that was where I wanted to go. And he didn't want to go down that path. So we amicably split the company. And I started this stupid idea for this. What if everybody loves classical music and everybody loves jazz, and nobody takes rock and pop seriously, in my opinion? There's always a little bit snooty. People are a bit snooty about rock and pop. And my elder brother, who was intolerant of it, he used to say it was music for boneheads, which of course I did not agree with. So I came up with a business plan, and a colleague at the company that I moved from, she joined me. Because she loved music, and we started on January the 1st, 1980. No, January the 1st, 1990. I apologize. And by the end of January, we had Guinness, the World Records book company. Somebody then I'd worked with 10 years earlier. He said, "Oh, Colin Larkin." He said, "Yeah, he's the guy that's crazy about music. He's got this project." Anyway, it didn't take long. We signed up with Guinness, and as you probably know, that first one and all those early books, um, we signed up in February 1990. The first multi-volume, it came out in 2022. Um, and the rest, as they say, is history. Since then, there's been 61 books, plus, as you mentioned earlier, the top 1,000 book. So it was an industry, but it was just basically a few people. I had Sue and I had Nick, great people, and a lot of outside contributors who were expertise in areas of music that I was yet to become expert in. I knew what I knew. And over the years, I've become really passionate about jazz, and I became really passionate about reggae. So I got to learn a lot more. So yeah, so we're into it then.
Yeah. Yeah, I can tell by your list. That's one of the things I go, that's if I have a blind spot going into like a couple years ago, it was jazz. And I've since corrected that where I've like my favorite jazz album of all time is Donald Byrd's A New Perspective. So maybe
Oh,
hard bop jazz probably appeals more to me than
yep,
like
me
Ornette
too.
Coleman,
Yep,
which is more experimental jazz that,
yep.
it's a little bit, I have to have a better ear for it, I think, before I'll grow to
No,
appreciate.
the
But
word is challenging, I think.
yeah, it is.
It really, I saw Ornette Coleman at the festival hall. Boy, was that a challenge. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't be critical. I can just say that it's my ignorance. I didn't get it. I didn't get it. Um,
Yeah.
uh,
I guess I
I
could.
was much more in the Cannibal Adderley, Miles Davis,
Mhm.
um, the '50s, that sort of blue note jazz
Yeah.
era. That was for me.
Yeah, I would think that like I like John Coltrane's Blue Train. I like Hank Mobley. Obviously Art Blakely. I think that's really my probably my wheelhouse for jazz.
That's really interesting because that's my main branch. That was the one that really got me going. But my old guitarist in my old band, we had a band in the '70s. He was a great guitarist. He went completely into jazz, and he introduced me to two names. One was Pat Metheny, and the other was John Schofield. And you look on my shelves. I mean, the shelves are just. I think I've got everything Pat Metheny and John Schofield have ever recorded. I just think they're extraordinary players, and Larry Carlton as well, who, as you know, was played guitar with Steely Dan for
Yeah.
a while. I'm really fond of Larry Carlton. So yeah, jazz guitar and the era of jazz that you mentioned are my favorite bits. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the same with me. I, from an anecdotal standpoint, for me, I think about when I was a kid, and now you got me thinking about when I was a kid. I was adopted by my grandmother, so I
Right.
grew up in a household with um, very much my uncle, aunts and uncles were my brothers and sisters by just association. You grew to love those people in that way.
Sure.
And I mean, so she listened to very much the old timey '50s rock and roll. And then I had a sister who was listening in the '70s to disco, and I had brothers who were listening to classic rock and country. So I got all of these
Right.
different types of genres that were influencing me. And it wasn't probably until I was 12 or 13 that I started realizing that I had my own taste in music, which was very much, along the pop sensibility, I would have to imagine, because I really did like Prince, and I
Yeah.
did like the new wave bands that were around at the time. Like Murray Head or Aha, the bands like that I
Oh,
thought were
okay.
great.
Okay.
Um, but that's, and I realized then I was shaping my own path. And then eventually I go off to the military, and I only picked up one cassette to take with me to boot camp just to kind of kill time. And lo and behold, the cassette was REM's Document. And it completely changed my way of thinking about how rock music could sound. And it didn't have to follow all of these cliches that regular pop music was following at the time. I felt like Michael Stipe and those guys were doing their own thing, and they weren't deviating, and somehow or another it was working for
Yeah.
me. So
No,
it was fun, you know.
they were. I mean, they became a big part of my interest because I was a sucker for a jangly 12 string. And when the Birds had long gone, passed on and broken up, um, I still ached for music that had that. Like Big Star was another band.
Mhm.
Big Star. Over in England, we had a band called Starry Eyed and Laughing, who also had a 12 string. But R.E.M. used to often have 12 string guitar with that jangly sound.
Mhm.
And I guess right from the beginning, they became, although later on, I think their albums just got better and better, frankly. And I think I'm jumping in here because I think your favorite REM album is my favorite.
Automatic for the People.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? Because, yeah, that's interesting. Because most people will say, oh, Out of Time or the other one, I can't remember, the two that really sold a lot.
Yeah.
Automatic for the People wasn't a massive seller, but it, for me, is by far, I mean, Be Mine, I think, is one of the greatest songs of
And
all
my
time.
wife was completely taken back when she said, "Well, what's your favorite REM song?" Because she just thought I was gonna, you're gonna sell out "Losing My Religion" or "The
Yeah,
One
yeah.
I Love." I said it's "Night Swimming." I
Oh,
said
yeah.
I think that is one of the, when you read the story behind it and the simplicity of the song, you're going, "This is just I think it was a masterpiece." I thought the whole album was great, and I thought Night Swimming and Find a River is probably the best 1-2 punch at the end of an album
Yeah,
that I
yeah.
could
Oh,
imagine, you know.
it's and it's reassuring as well because I worked with Microsoft. They published a thing called Music Central, and in the 90s this was, and I got to know a great writer who worked with them called Ken Barnes. You may have heard of Ken Barnes.
Yeah.
He's still around, and that was his favorite REM album, which surprised me because this was out in Seattle, by the way. Um, but it sort of gave me a bit of confidence, really, because I was a little bit like a fish out of water with thinking, well, why don't I love Out of Time? Why isn't that one my favorite? Or Murmur. Everybody was raving about Murmur. Yeah, it's a great album, but when Automatic came along, and my second eldest son, that happens to be his favorite REM album. So yeah, it back your instinct, I say.
Yeah.
It,
I
it
think
works.
at this
It's
point
fun.
I'm learning I'm just going to stick to my guns about what I like. And I know that I have a lot of content, colleagues and stuff that I do videos with that they 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 can't necessarily get past the like 1979 for their taste. They have a hard time branching, you know, anywhere near the 21st century, and they're out. They're not doing a video with me. If I say, "Oh yeah, we're going to do something," it's for the 2000s, they're like, "I'm out." They don't want to go there.
That's strange because the 80s for me. I've always been critical of the 80s, and I've done two or three books on the 80s music, but there was so much in the 80s. People stopped playing guitars in the 80s, in my opinion, and they started to have drum machines. I mean,
Mm.
I hated that. And those? Do you remember that plinky plonky piano?
Yeah.
I hate it. Our lovely keyboard player Mel, whenever she tries out a plinky plonky sound on her Korg, she gets the look from me because I can't stand that sort of waterfally. Hate it. So the 80s for me, I'm sorry to say, yeah, we had Police and we had Elvis Costello, we had Joe Jackson, we had the Pretenders, but on The Cure.
Yeah.
I really struggled with the 80s, and it wasn't until the end of the 80s when I heard Stone Roses, for example,
Yeah.
and I got into that the movement that came from Britain, which is heavily inspired by the 60s. for me, the 90s was fantastic. It all lifted up again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I make the
Absolutely.
argument that people say, well, what's your favorite decade? I go, it may be the 70s, but it's a lot closer than you think, because I was managing an alternative radio station in the 90s when
Oh,
all of this like weird graying of, there's no longer black and white pop music, alternative music. It was kind of graying a little bit. It was kind of
yeah.
crossing that
Yeah.
threshold
Yeah.
and getting into, REM's getting into living rooms, and Britpop is getting into living rooms,
Sure.
and I thought, I said, it's what a great time to be in the music scene, as a manager of one of these stations, and you're talking to music reps, and Nirvana's happening, and those grunge is happening around you, and the battle of the Britpop was happening around you, while you're in the middle of it.
Yeah.
I felt like I was blessed at that time.
It's certainly for me. What I was blessed that time also because the books were doing so well during the 90s, and the latter part. So therefore, every record company, every press officer loved me because I was writing about the left field stuff that they wanted to promote, because that was what I was listening to. So consequently, through the door, I was just, and that's how the collection came about of CDs. Every week, maybe I don't know, 20, 30 a day,
Yeah.
of just about everything that was really what I felt was really good. As you say, the Seattle scene, I loved it. I love the alt rock scene. I loved. I hate using the word Britpop, but I loved so much of that stuff.
Yeah.
The Oasis, Charlatans, that sort of connection. There was some good stuff around,
Yeah.
and and then there was these strange bands from America, usually from America, that became Fountains of Wayne, Gin Blossoms, and these really interesting. They never really set the world alight, chart-wise, but boy, I look forward to getting those albums that were sent to me by the. Otherwise, I'd never have known, because even the music press over here and Rolling Stone magazine, I don't think they were covering bands like Smog or Wilco.
No.
Some
No.
of these who I just love. Eels. When I discovered Eels, boy, and managed to see them in the UK. What a fantastic band they were. So there you are.
Yeah, I actually had the privilege of having dinner with the Gin Blossoms before they opened in a little club called the Zoots. This is before their big album hit, and I was
Yeah.
like, these are the greatest guys. It was kind of fun just to hang out with them as regular human beings, and I don't even think we even talked about music.
Oh, really?
The executive said I can go to the club and have dinner with them. I think we talked about everything but music, and
And that's that's great. Their
yeah,
sensibility as well. Have the melodic stuff again. Gave me that smell of the birds. You see, even with some of them, the melodies and songs, I love that. I love that melody. I found out about you. I think is my favourite Gin Blossom song. But they had so many great little songs. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
good on you. I'm glad. Well done. I never interviewed them, but there you go.
So maybe like another question I've always wanted to ask you is like, how has your music taste evolved over the years? And do those come in small variations over the years, or is there actually like big chunks of all of a sudden discovering something and then you're like all in and then you deep dive it?
Okay, the 70s. Okay, I took you through my 60s
Yeah.
journey, and I got into the 70s, and when the 70s started, it was singer-songwriter. I suddenly developed an awareness of James Taylor, Cat Stevens were doing interesting things there. Stephen Stills was doing great solo stuff. But in England, we had a fantastic guitarist who used to be with Fairport Convention, a songwriter called Richard Thompson,
Oh
who,
yes. Yeah.
who to this day is a great songwriter. his voice irritates me a little bit, but he writes some fabulous songs. And then I started to go to see live an amazing performer called John Martin.
Yes, I've listened to a couple.
He is extraordinary. He really touched my life. I think I saw John Martin along with David Crosby and Steve Winwood. I've probably seen John Martin more than any other artist over the years, and he sadly died. he drank himself to death in the nicest possible way. Bless him. He was a Jekyll lad. He was, he was heaven and hell, Jekyll and Hyde. But he put out over about 25 albums. Yet the album that everybody talks of his is the Solid Air album, which is not my favourite John Martin album he made, in my opinion. So I was going along this singer-songwriter path, and then there were the '60s had gone, and then there was this what we called the new wave. Now I don't know if they called it the new wave in America. I've got to be careful here, but we called the new wave. We called the bands from the new wave. Okay, Little Feat, Tom Petty, R.E.M. we put in that bag. And then I put in my bag my I was going to say Secret Delight. It's not a Secret Delight. Poco. I thought Poco were the greatest country rock band. And I used to get really angry with the success of the Eagles, That right. I'm not going to swear, but that used to that peed me off. Okay, Poco never. They were just the best. Nothing came near Poco for me. So that's where my taste suddenly went. It was still pro-American, and through the '70s, I was a bit slow with punk. I caught up about a year later, and I thought The Damned. I thought were fantastic. I thought the Stranglers were great, and that Pistols album was great. But I was still struggling. I was pretending to love punk, and in my heart, I didn't really love punk. But we got through it, and then the taste had changed. But by the time we got to the '80s. I mentioned earlier, there was nothing going on there. I couldn't stand it. The only two contemporary bands from the '80s, other than the ones I mentioned, were Talk Talk.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I love Mark Hollis's voice. I love his voice.
What a beautiful! What was the album called? Spirit of Eden.
Spirit of Eden. Yeah, it has. Wow. I believe in you. Yeah. Is like one of my favorites.
Absolutely beautiful. Yeah. And the other band of that ilk was called Blue Nile, and their album Hats, which
had Headlights on the Parade on it. Is that correct?
That's it. Yeah. Let's go out tonight. I think was on it as well. That was an era of a little style of music in that brief era in the '80s when I did connect. And as I mentioned, we went through the '90s. But I would always go back. And I still do to this day. I mean, the Beatles and Dylan. Mm-hmm. If you were to ask me what are the two life-changing, most important things in the history of music, for me, my ears, Beatles, absolutely, unquestionably. My family will confirm this. They've had to put up with this for a very long time. My obsession and love for the Beatles, particularly. I've been trying to beat John Lennon for 60 years, for goodness sake. And Dylan, of course, Dylan. I just saw Dylan just a few months ago in November, just gone, over here in Bournemouth, and I tell you, he was just. I don't care what anybody says. Oh, he hasn't got much of a voice, has he? I don't give a monkey's. He was magnificent.
I get to see him in September.
Oh, good man.
Willie Nelson are playing together at the Bangor, and I'm like, I have to go because he's like my muse. Whenever I took a writing class because I'm just not very good at it. And I like to do things that I'm not good at. And it was really challenging. But what I found was um, he was Blonde on Blonde was the record I wanted to listen to when I was sitting down writing, because I felt like that album was just such an epitome of great songwriting that I felt like, no matter how good I felt like I was getting, I don't care what grade I got in the class, I just felt like there's nobody that can touch this guy. I
Yeah.
thought Visions of Johanna was the best reconciliation of poetry to music that I've ever heard in my life. And I was like, I don't think anybody's come close
No.
to better.
No. In as Joni Mitchell comes close in terms. I mean, I think Dylan is the greatest male musical poet of all time, and I do think Joni Mitchell is the greatest female musical poet of all time. But no, Dylan is it's pretty special.
Yeah.
Even now, he's so prolific. He's still churning out stuff. He's still interesting. Yeah, no. So Dylan and the Beatles. But I hark back. I go back to Ray Davies. I think Ray Davies is a genius. I mean, he's not writing. He's not doing much. Ray Davies, just another up there. Not quite with Lennon and McCartney. And then some of those '60s bands that I still listen to. The Hollies, I thought, were a great band. And the Zombies.
Yeah.
I got to know Rod Argent many years ago, and I strangely kept in touch with him. He always picks up the phone, Rod, and he's always willing to chat to you. Sadly he's had a stroke now, and he's just recovering, and rumor has it he won't be able to perform ever again. But Rod Argent and Colin Blunstone, that they did so much in America, but over here they really struggled to be recognized. It's such quality music. So I dive back occasionally is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
But I do like some contemporary. I like Americana as well a lot. We call it Americana. I don't know what Lucinda Williams.
We call it Americana or Heartland Rock, or it kind of,
yeah.
This alt country scene over here is very big now. Like Jason Isbell is very big in the States, and Lucinda Williams people really like, as far as that goes, and I like them too. I think they're great. Gives you at least some of that songwriting stuff that's still going on. People are still writing, good songs. That's why I like listening to music like that. So, and there's other contemporaries like I like Michael Kuwanaka. I don't know if you ever heard of him.
Yeah, on the shelf there. Absolutely wonderful record. Recommended to by one of my kids. But it's no, a little bit left field for me. But I went down that path.
That rabbit hole.
But there are those albums that never sold a copy when they were released, that it's taken 20, 30, 40 years for some of them to become iconic albums. When I say iconic, I don't mean in terms of sales. I mean in terms of the prestige that they now have. Dare I say it, I don't like using the word music critics, because some music critics can be a pain in the backside, but their credibility with many critics is high. And I had this sort of cocky little pride that when I first reviewed these albums, nobody could care less. I reviewed Dennis Wilson's solo album, and it's called Pacific Ocean Blue.
Yeah.
And I think it came out in '77. I mean, the Beach Boys were dead and really struggling then. Brian was AWOL, and Dennis was sort of not in a good shape, but he was creatively the most interesting one. The album did nothing, and I absolutely I did a review in Dark Star magazine. I raved about this album. Here we are, 40 odd years later, that is now regarded as a classic.
It's
Same with David Crosby.
Yeah.
David Crosby's first album, which is to this day still my favorite album of all time. Again, they said it was self-indulgent. Yeah, one review, and it may have been Rolling Stone actually, said it was self-indulgent CRAP. And it was not self-indulgent. He basically got all his San Francisco mates. It was the least self-indulgent album, in my opinion. You know, he got all the Airplane and the Dead. Joni Mitchell was on it. Neil Young was on it. How can you call that self-indulgent?
I don't know.
There you go. There you go.
I take critics with a grain of salt. Like I make a joke all the time that I go and read Robert Christgau's review of most albums only because I will do the opposite of what he says. If he says that he doesn't like an album, I immediately go and listen to it or I buy it. For some reason, him and I have just never like agreed on anything. I don't know what it is. So now it's a running joke. But what does Robert Christgau say? Okay, I'm going the opposite direction.
You know, we had one in England. He's a good guy, really. He's Charles Shaw Murray. He used to write for the NME, as it became, or as Ray Davies calls it, the enemy. Charles Shaw Murray and Christgau, I know from their personalities that they almost deliberately wanted to spike you. They were doing it just to wind you up. And so many of those reviews that he did, Christgau, and Charles Shaw Murray, I just, you know, in my heart, I'm sure they just did it as a little fingers up job, really. I always, in America, I loved Ralph J. Gleason. Obviously, was the grandfather. Robert Hilburn over there in San Francisco. He was I think he's still alive. He was really switched on. But the one who's still around, and I am in touch with him occasionally, is Joel Selvin.
I've heard the name.
He's written some fabulous books. Right in my zone, the Monterey Pop Festival, Woodstock. He's written stuff about the San Francisco scene, and I think he's done one on Laurel Canyon as well. So that he was touching into my little passions there, and he's a great objective American writer, but you know what he likes, and he wouldn't go down the path of doing what Christgau does, deliberately to wind you up.
I think that I see it a lot. I see critics playing it safe and giving artists passes on their albums and just assuming that anything they do is great. I have a deep resentment when they do that. You know, I mean, even me, I'll say, hey, you know, if you put out enough music, you're bound to put out, you know, CRAP every once in a while. I mean, just by virtue of just the volume, if you put out a lot of albums, you're gonna miss every once in a while.
Of course you are.
Yeah,
it is impossible. I mean, the Beatles made a couple of, in my opinion, bad albums. You know, I have to admit it. Dylan, let's face it.
Yeah.
Dylan put out, I mean, he put out, but I can think of 5 shockers there. You know, Oh Mercy, Saved.
Yeah, Saved is.
There's some stinkers there.
Yeah.
But, you know, but when you look at as a body of work, you know, overall, you're right. Actually, you're right.
I do like the fact that if you could name a few more albums that maybe you championed over the years that never quite got into, you know, over that hump and into the living rooms of the everyday listener.
I would love to do that.
Yeah.
More than anything, because that little mission that I'm on, this little chip on the shoulder, with the band that I'm with at the moment, great friends and a great bunch of people. We had a band before, and there was a fantastic bass player in that band. And we parted company amicably for other reasons. Musical indifference, I think, is the expression. I came in one day with my Love Forever Changes cover T-shirt on. Okay, now I don't know if you're aware that Electra album the original album cover. It's a beautiful piece of
Yeah,
artwork.
it is. It's really nice.
I mean, it's memorable, and it's iconic. And I suspect that there are many people that know that album through the cover, not necessarily through the music. And he said, "What's that?" I said, "It's Forever Changes." And he said, "I said it's the second greatest album ever made in the history of the world." I said, "Rather, bit cocky, but that is my opinion. It is my second favorite album in the history of the world." And he'd never heard of Love, and B, clearly he'd never heard of the album. And he said he would listen to it, but I know that he never got round to it. So Forever Changes never charted. Forever Changes is, I don't need to lecture you, and I don't need to lecture your audience. The world knows already that is an unbelievably beautiful piece of art, that album. So Arthur Lee, and I was able to see him I've seen him a few times over the years, but I saw his last 3 concerts. He was dying, as you know, of leukemia. And I saw that famous where he recreated Forever Changes at the London Festival Hall.
Man.
And that was, it was so wonderful. It was a tearful moment because he did it so beautifully. So Forever Changes. Then we've got a band from the Canyon in Los Angeles called Spirit. Yep. A wonderful man, and again I interviewed him. Spent several hours with this in a grubby hotel room when he was on his uppers, Randy, California, who was a really lovely man. They did an album in 1969. I think it came out in 70. It was called The 12 Dreams of Dr. Sardonicus.
Yes.
What a fantastic record that is. Not only that, it's got Nature's Way on it, which is probably one of the earliest environmental ecology songs that there ever has been. That is a blindingly great album that has now reached that sort of classic status. 2 John Martin albums have also reached that status. One is called One World, and the other one is called Grace and Danger. Now, those 2 albums for me are remarkable. I mentioned Dennis Wilson's album to you. I will briefly touch on the fact that as fantastic as Pet Sounds is, and it is undeniably a beautiful record, how about Sunflower? Say that to somebody who doesn't know that much about the Beach Boys, and they may look at you with crossed eyes and not have a clue what you're talking. Sunflower, to me, is my favorite Beach Boys album by a mile. It's got Dennis Wilson's Forever, which is a beautiful song on it, as well as Add Some Music to Your Day. I mean, for me, Sunflower is the best. And again, I'm not even sure it made the Billboard 200. How about that? Odyssey and Oracle, I don't know if I mentioned it by name, but that album, the Zombies had broken up when that came out in 68. I think it was end of 67, 68. The Zombies had broken up because, apart from America, who loved them, they couldn't get arrested anywhere. And they made this fabulous record at Abbey Road. And bless him, Al Cooper, the great Al Cooper, incidentally, the very first person to send his voting form for the top 1,000 albums was Al Cooper. How about that? He knew a writer called Jeff Tamarkin, and Jeff got Al to send me. He's 20. So Al Cooper was the man who suggested to CBS, this band Zombies, who you know, have made this record. They can't get a deal. So they got a one-off deal with CBS, Odyssey and Oracle.
Oh, that is such a beautiful album.
It's a faultless record. And fortunately, Time of the Season was a huge hit in America. Yeah. But nothing in England, forget it. Absolutely forget it. You know, I got a deletion, a bin copy. Can you believe it? It was deleted, or it wasn't selling over here. I picked up a copy for I think it was 10 shillings. I've still got that original vinyl, and it was mono.
Wow. Yeah. I
I've
think
got
maybe after he's gone and this will be our year. Those are like
oh,
those would be in
oh.
my top, 100 songs of all time.
This will
So
be a yeah. They're very complicated songs to play. That he's a clever musician, Rod. He uses lots of those nasty little sharp sevenths and diminished, but yeah, that is just a blinder of an album.
yeah.
I think. Oh, and the first Moby Grape album. Oh,
Yes.
come on!
Yeah, I
Don't,
I actually picked up I went in and found a Moby Grape album, but they
yeah.
put the wrong record in it. They put the 68 record in there. And so I was, I was kind of upset, but at the same time, I still enjoyed that record. So I was like, all right, well, I'm definitely keeping it because I only
Yeah.
paid like, I think $7 for it at a local store here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the 68? I mean, talking about Wow,
Wow.
presumably.
Yeah. That's, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Wow is fantastic. It's
Yeah.
got Motorcycle Irene. It's got Can't Be So Bad. It's got Miller's Blues on it, I think, as
Yeah.
well. That
Yeah,
is
I enjoyed it. I thought it was great.
the first the first Moby Grape album. I heard we had a disc jockey here who's pretty legendary in the UK, a man called John Peel, and I would say that John Peel was the most significant music DJ that actually introduced me to all this stuff. He used to be on one of the ships, the pirate ships called Radio London, and he had a late night thing called Perfumed Garden, where he would play all this hippie stuff. He'd just come back from America, so he was playing all this. Dare I say it, he was playing Zappa as well. A Mothers of Invention. He was playing really off the wall stuff. One of the songs that he kept playing, I think he played it every night. I think it was called "Listen, My Friends." Okay, listen, my friends, do 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 do. Listen, my friends. Okay, so I was at art college at the time, and I went into the record store, and I said, "Moby Grape." He said, "Yeah." He'd heard of Moby Grape. I said, "Have you got the single "Listen, My Friends"?" And he said, "No." He said, "I don't know that." He said, "Go over there and we've got the album over there. See if it's on the album." I looked at the album. No, there's no track called "Listen, My Friends." No. So these funny names. One called Omaha. There we go. I don't know if it's dawned on you yet. And it took about a year for me to realize that song, "Listen, My Friends," was Omaha. I don't even think they mentioned the word Omaha in the song. There is no Moby Grape song called "Listen, My Friends." So can you believe I finally bought the album up in my bedroom, banged it on, and then it came on. "Listen, my friend." The light bulb came on. It was just a wonderful moment. So Moby Grape have been, I mean, I've got everything they've ever. There's a fantastic book, by the way. What's his name? Cam. Oh, put that down. Cam. What's his name? Cam Cobb.
Okay.
He's an American, and he's written this fabulous book on Moby Grape. And he's also just done a new one on Skip Spence, who was an important part of Moby Grape. Yeah, one of the great should have been.
Yeah.
Bit like Buffalo Springfield. They should have been enormous with the talent that they had, but they again.
Yeah. It's all about place and time. It's weird how that's how things are shaped, and and bands there's like, how many albums out there sold 2 million copies that basically were doing it on the virtue of one hit song that made the top 40.
Absolutely, I completely agree.
It's sad because you listen to those albums and you're going, I just don't, it's weak, and you got one great song and 9 fillers. I don't understand, why it sold so much. And And
And there's one.
that's one of those topics I know you want to talk about a little bit too,
Sure.
Yeah.
If I could just self-indulgently add one final album to that list of
Oh, sure.
the greatest albums ever made that nobody's ever heard of. Um, it was at the end of the British blues boom. So around that time, the end of the 60s, we had John Mayall, who was doing great things. We had Cream, although Cream had broken up by then. Um, and then Led Zeppelin came along to start that sort of heavy prog blues thing. And there were other great bands around at the time, like Taste. Um, the one band that, of course, didn't hit the headlines was they were called the Keith Hartley Band.
Keith Hart.
Keith spelled Keef. Well, if you're asking me, what is the greatest blues rock album of all time? It's an album called Half Breed, and it's by the Keith Hartley Band.
Okay.
And I've recommended it to so many people over so many years, and with pretty favourable results. It is British heavy, slightly a fraction of jazz rock in there. It's basically a heavy blues album, blues rock, progressive. Let's use the word, because they've got a violin in it, and they've got a Hammond organ. Yeah, Half Breed. Goodness knows how many copies I've got. I've got remastered ones on CD, but check that out. If you for $10, it's worth $10 of your money. Keith Hartley Band, and that's it. There have been so many albums like that that are just. I know my ears. I will say my ears are pretty good.
Yeah, I think I trust my instincts now. At first,
Yeah.
I thought maybe I was the odd duckling but now I trust my instincts. Like I will viciously, before I wouldn't tell people that how much I like Radiohead, but I will viciously defend Radiohead now.
Me too.
Or even the band, one of the ones a Canadian band, Tragically Hip. I go, that's another band that should have been huge. And for some reason, it just never resonated with America's audience. Yeah. And they're a massive band in Canada. They're like, Canada's favorite, children or something. And I don't get it. I mean, instead, people are saying that, when they think of Canada, they're going, oh, Bryan Adams or Alanis Morissette or
don't
whatever.
Go there.
Yeah.
Go there. Bryan Adams, sorry, just as an interject here, the article that we wrote on Bryan Adams for the Encyclopedia, it wasn't rude. It wasn't. It told it like it is. The thing that upset Bryan Adams was it never went over the top. We never said he's the greatest. He's a mini Bruce Springsteen. He's wonderful. He's fantastic. He's got a great. We never said that. We were just telling it like it is. And he actually got in touch with us, saying that he thinks that the ratings that we gave the album, we gave, they weren't all 5 stars. They weren't 4. There was quite a lot of 3-star albums. I stand by what we say. Bryan Adams has made a lot of 3-star albums.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Reckless you give a 4 to or something. I don't know, but everything else I'm going,
He wanted us to reconsider because he felt that we were unfair in the ratings that we'd given his albums. But no, I'm sorry, mate. Yeah. But
yeah. And I say, now, my wife has grown to like Radiohead too now, some of their stuff. And she sees me now, and whenever people want to talk about OK Computer, I'm like, I'm in. I will defend this album to the end of time for what it managed to do for alternative music in the late 90s and give alternative music a path forward, because I don't know whether it had a clear path forward coming out of the post-grunge era.
I think they were on their way with the bends. for
Yeah.
me. Of, if you're asking me, my favourite Radiohead is the Bends.
Yeah.
OK Computer would be my second choice, but I knew there was something special. But the track Bones,
Hmm.
they go off on one there, and I think, wow, now this band are really going to be something special. Yeah, they certainly and they continued as well. I've
Yeah.
loved most of it, what they put out.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think Johnny Greenwood, when I heard him play the guitar on Street Spirit on the Bends, I was like, I knew what an immensely talented guy. And I know that he does other material. He does soundtracks, a lot of
Oh, he did
soundtracks and stuff. He's extremely, extremely creative.
film. I've seen some movies, and I've seen his name come up, and I thought, wow, it's Johnny Greenwood.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's done so much. Yeah, no, he's prolific. No, they were one of the highlights as well, I must say. You were going to mention that word forest fire, weren't you?
Yes, I really I do want to get into that because I know that that's something you really want to talk about, and I want you to kind of elaborate. I don't want to steal any of the thunder. So why don't you tell me about the forest fire effect, or I think another thing you called it was the dinner party
Yeah,
exposure.
but that's where it comes from.
Okay, yeah,
The forest fire starts through the dinner party effect, and it's usually you're married, you're married, you've got your first mortgage, you may not have kids then, or you may have one kid or one on the way, but you've got a circle of friends. You've done your being crazy about music when you were younger. I got through my Buddy Holly Everly Brothers bit. I came out of that. This person in his 30s, he did his Smiths bit, or his Joy Division bit, and he came out of that. Then you've got as you get to that stage in your life, a lot of people lose it a bit. They come back to it. All being well, they do come back to it. Some don't, sadly. I mean, I've got a few friends, they never did come back to it. Those albums stayed up in the loft, and then they went to a car boot sale. Mercifully, I don't know many people like that, because I think they should be shot or put in prison. So it's the dinner party. Oh, this is good. You're playing it. Oh, what's this? Oh, this is the new dinner. Oh, really? Oh, I haven't heard from them for ages. That's great. Or what's this? Oh, I don't know. What's her name? Alison Moyet. Really, that's good. Oh, what's the name of this? Dire Straits. What a great name. That's a really good name. Oh, they're still making records, are they? What's the album called? It's called Hotel California. Oh wow, yeah, I'm gonna have to get this. So there's a whole bunch of them. For me, the number one, I've written them down actually, because I knew you were going to ask me about this, because this is one of my pets. The forest fire. I've got copyright on that word, forest fire. It's mine. I own it. The forest fire, where an album goes ballistic, and it starts at dinner parties, and then it spreads because they play it at their dinner party, and this is great. It's and it just bursts, explodes. The biggest one I've got 4 or 5, but the main one for me is Rumours by Fleetwood Mac. Now, I'm not going to knock Rumours because I know it's a great album, right? I might be a bit rude about some of the other albums by artists that have become forest fire albums. Rumours became a forest fire album. The album before Rumours was called Fleetwood Mac.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that was the album that saw them come out of a dark period where Peter, bless him, had left the band. And then they tried various people for albums, and it never really worked. Christine was proving to be the most talented in the band. Then they got Buckingham and Nicks to join. So that album, Fleetwood Mac, I thought that was just an incredible record. Monday Morning, Rhiannon, Say You Love Me, as good as anything on on that time. How? So I ask your audience. So how can Rumours sell 27 billion copies and Fleetwood Mac sell 6 million copies? I just don't get it, because I don't understand how an album can be so much better in terms of sales. It's ridiculous. That was, to me, that was the ultimate Forest Fire album that I have to admit I do like. Then we get to the ones that I just couldn't stand. Now, this is probably going to make, you're probably going to get a few comments now saying that guy Larkin, what is he talking about? So be warned, because I'm going to stir up a bit of a hornet's nest now. I'll start gently. Hotel California. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I was a big fan of Desperado. I thought the Desperado album was just perfect. It was country rock, and I even would admit up to liking the Eagles then, before they stole 50% of Poco's members in the Grand Theft. And then Hotel California came along. I mean, One of These Nights was a good album. On the Border was a good album. Then this hype came along for Hotel California. I mean, that sold zillions of records.
Yeah.
So when you would talk, that was a classic dinner party, because the people at the dinner party had heard of the Eagles, and therefore, when they found out that they'd made a new album, they're bound to get it. And that album exploded. The other one around that time, no, not around that time, came in the 80s, I think. I thought Dire Straits were great. I thought Mark Knopfler was a fabulous guitarist. And I bought that first album, and I bought that second album. For me, the album was called Making Movies.
Yeah.
It had Wild West End, I think. It had Romeo and Juliet. It was just that's, to me, is the perfect Dire Straits album. And then they brought out this thing called Brothers in Arms. I mean, and it, as you know, sold 390 billion copies. It just caught fire. It was a classic Forest, with the most dreadful songs like Twisting by the Pool. Money for nothing. If I hear Money for Nothing again in my life, I'm jumping off the balcony here. I can't stand it.
How much of that was MTV? You know,
it was on TV.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're the criminals there, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
I don't understand how that album became so successful, and yet albums like Making Movies just didn't make it. That was a classic. Okay, the final one, and this is where you're going to get some nasty mail about me. I thought Bookends by Simon and Garfunkel was the finest album they'd ever done.
You and I agree on that, then.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in my song. Yeah.
I think America is arguably the greatest Paul Simon song ever. But that album as a whole, apart from the voices of old people, which in the days of vinyl, you had to listen to that or get up and move the needle. Nowadays, of course, you can just skip it with a CD. That was Art Garfunkel's self-indulgence. But it was the perfect album. And when we arrived at Bookends, I'd already been through Parsley Sage album, which is brilliant. Sounds of Silence album, which is brilliant. I mean, so many fantastic songs. And then we get to the most hyped Forest Fire dinner party album of all, Bridge Over Bloody Troubled Bloody Water. And again, with those irritating El Conde Pasa. What? I mean, that's a wrist slasher for me. What's the other one? Cecilia, you're breaking my... Oh, no, don't go there. And this is going to make me really unpopular. And I know this because I play with my music buddies. We do a lot of open mic and sort of acoustic evenings, they all do the Boxer, bloody Boxer. Now, I'm sorry, I will say it here and now. I don't like the Boxer. It irritates me. I think it's an average song, and I know that I'm in the minority here because I know how many people play it at folk clubs. But it drives me round the twist. So that album, even my friends were coming to me saying, "Oh, Bridge Over Troubled Waters. Oh, what a great album!" And I'm waving this little bookends flag. Bookends, don't you know bookends? Fortunately, I've been proved right over the years now. The critics agree with you. They agree
Yeah.
with me. Bookends is the best song on
Yeah,
God.
it's nice when that happens, at the same time when that starts to happen and people start to come around and not just give in. I take a lot of criticism because I don't like Hotel California that much either, and I think The Long Run is my favorite Eagles album because I love the Sad Cafe and I love Those Shoes. I think those are great songs, and I catch a lot of flack for that, especially the guys who are just into classic or progressive rock or whatever. They give me a lot of slack. They're going, you just don't know what you're talking about, with The Long Run, and I'm going, I think it's taste. I said I feel like Hotel California, you know, Life in the Fast Lane and all that stuff. It just felt like it was contrived in some way. That I think my daughter, she likes to say, well, I forget the term that she used. She used something like, well, that's really, trite. That's really safe. She'll say stuff like that about songs. That's a little safe. You know, like they're just doing what they know everybody wants to consume.
It's a good analogy, actually. Yeah, you're right. What I've never understood is why has that sold 38 million and Bookends has sold 3.8 million? That means it's 10 times better. Does it? Why does it? No, it doesn't mean that it's 10 times better. It just had that forest fire effect. Just
Yeah.
hey.
Everybody's saying, oh, well, this is what you have to consume. This is what you have to consume. One thing that irritated something that happened in the 90s when I was managing the station is that you're under a lot of pressure from the record companies to play their stuff. And there's a lot of stuff coming out. And I only could rank 40 albums every week. And it's, so sometimes to keep the bigger record companies sending me material that I needed to keep running the station, you're gonna fudge some of those rankings to keep Electro Records happy, to keep Geffen Records happy, to Warner Brothers, the big guys. We're putting the pressure on you, and so it became more and more difficult to keep the independent labels, the Roadrunner Records and the Rough Trade Records, getting them in there, squeezing them in. It was tough.
It is tough, and yeah. I've been guilty also of an album that I'm convinced was a 2-star album, of just notching it to a 3 because I like the guy in the PR company, and you could say that's wrong of me to do that, but I just didn't want to rock the boat too much. Give it 3 instead of 2, but in your heart, it's a 2 album. And that way he will continue to respect you and he will continue to send you the stuff.
Yeah, the relationships are still there that you need to, kind of move forward,
Yeah, because occasionally I did it a couple of times in my career. I gave something a 1 twice, 2 different albums, and they really didn't like that. I do.
Well,
one of them was Shakin' Stevens, and I was I had somebody a follower, what do you call it? A stalker.
Yeah,
a female stalker, because I'd given this Shakin' Stevens album 1 star.
Wow.
And then later on, I did the same to a Kim Wilde album. I don't even know if you know.
I remember her vaguely. Did she have Kids in America? Did she do that?
America.
Yeah,
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, her brother was Ricky. Her dad was a famous old rock and roll guy from the 50s, Marty Wilde, who actually, it became quite well known in the music biz anyway. He was okay. And Kim Wilde's great, by the way. I've got no problem with Kim. She's a fantastic gardener now. Uh, True, it's true. But I gave her 1 star because it was a stinker. I mean, if an album is stinker, then it's a stinker. I'm sorry,
Yes.
my ears are not lying. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it to gain points. And I gave
Yeah.
it 1 star. Boy, did I get flack for that from
Wow.
the
That's a
I
shame.
guess the record company must have told. I guess the PR company must have told the record company because they have to report
Yeah.
um, back, their what they get, and it suddenly filtered through, and I get angry Kim Wilde people.
It happens. I know my wife worked for a Burrell's company that's what they would do. Like there would be clients who would say, "We want all the information that comes out surrounding this album." Like Prince was one of their clients, and like so anything that was out on TV or newspaper, they would collect and then send it to the company, and then of course they'd go through it or whatever to kind of gauge, how things were moving along. But I can imagine that instrument could be used in a negative way. We can go after the people that aren't on board with what we're pushing. Yeah, I can imagine it has to be true.
Oh, you're gonna get the flat. I got a lot of flack over Top 1,000 albums
Yeah.
because the Muppets weren't paying attention. This wasn't Colin Larkin's favorite 1,000 albums. I
No.
don't know how many times I've told people that. It says so on the covers of all the
Yeah.
books. It's the people have voted. It's not
Yeah.
me. Um, I did my own little 50 lists, like the most 50 underrated albums. Yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
All time, and I'm open about it. But the voting of that book was not. It wasn't fiddled at all. It was a genuine, as I said to you, initially we had 20. Um, when I first came in from Al Cooper, I remember it was originally 20 votes for one and 1 vote for number 20. That's how it started.
Right. Yeah.
And I soon realized, because when you got down to, I used Al Cooper as the example, because when you got down to his 17th or 18th album, I never even heard of the album. The taste is somewhat esoteric,
Yeah.
as you probably know. So we amended it fairly soon to 10, which made much more sense.
Yeah.
10 down, which is why we ended up with. Well, had we have done the 4th edition, which never did come out because the people at the people at Virgin changed ownership. We were close to 300,000 votes. Remarkably, it was still virtually the same. Oasis had dropped slightly. Radiohead had gained strength. R.E.M. had gained strength, but it was still Beatles, Dylan.
Yeah.
And I think U2 was still holding their own. It was still that bunch of
Of course.
albums
I would
that
think that
they're
would hold true. I mean,
going to stay the same, isn't it?
yeah.
Then there were these amazing infiltrators like Adele. I'm sorry, Adele fans. I never got Adele. Yeah, sue me. She came in unbelievably high. Again, there's a little bit of a dinner party forest fire here, I
Yeah.
think.
I think so too. Yeah.
And there were a couple of others that came along. And I think when we closed the voting finally, I think Ed Sheeran was just creeping in. So it was that long ago, as you can imagine.
Right.
Nowadays, I'm pretty certain that, well, I'm not sure about Adele anymore, but I think Ed Sheeran would certainly be figuring quite high. But it would be fascinating to know if I'd put money on the fact that the Beatles would still be there. And I have a feeling that Radiohead would be. I'm not sure about Oasis. because they thought they fell from maybe the tour now. I mean, maybe there will be a renaissance, but
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, I think that the friction between the brothers there for some reason hurt their brand. Even like it's kind of it's ripples in the water. I feel like that it those ripples never really kind of gone away. Everybody associates them as two brothers that just couldn't keep it together to keep the momentum going. That type of situation, you know.
and now, as you know, the sales of the tickets for the world tour is probably the best pension fund I think anybody has ever had. Of course, they're going to fall out at the end of the tour.
Of
Of
course,
course,
yeah,
they're going to say we're never going to speak to each other again. But they'll probably be about 18 million quid richer.
yeah. I'm glad you touched on the top 1,000 albums. I did have a couple quick questions about that. I mean, I was curious. You touched upon it a little bit about how you gathered the data.
Yeah,
Did you just was there a way that you just
yeah.
sent it out in mass, or was there something
Oh,
published that people could
yes.
participate? And yeah,
In several ways, and as time went on, it got bigger and bigger. Um, Initially, we printed out a simple voting list, and I sent it out to, I left it in a pile of voting forms in record shops that I knew, local record shops, and then a couple of other people in the music biz, music writers, music journalists. I knew people at the Melody Maker in those days and NME. Um, Certainly knew the record companies, that's for sure, and the PR companies. The other thing that was pretty good was schools. We left them with schools because we wanted, we want the kids to
hmm
participate.
yeah,
Few art colleges and a few universities. Yeah, I think a couple of my kids were at university at that time. So I give 100 forms to there. So we printed quite a few thousand of those, and because it was such a simplistic form, people could print. You just photocopy it and
hmm
photocopy it. So that was, I mean, they started, and then musicians, i.e., Al Cooper, the example, and so many other music writers, they wanted to participate, of course.
yeah,
Other musicians, some fascinating lists from dare I say it, famous musicians. Very interesting. Eric Clapton's list was a bit boring, by the way. Anyway, so that expanded and expanded. But what really happened was when I sold my company to Muse, and we became Muse, which Muse in the USA was a big, as you know, data company. All those booths in Tower Records was Muse. So Muse became a big company, and they bought me and kept me, and kept me going as the chairman of Muse UK for another 97, 11 years, in fact. Wonderful times, great people. So I was backwards and forwards to the USA, and I was going to all the big music stuff, the NAMs, and all those big record stuff, where there were thousands of people. And that coincided with this thing called the internet, a very interesting little thing. And we had a booth at NAM, and we had what was the other one? Oh, Medem. That was the big one. Medem down in Cannes, which is the big music business thing every year. So we had a computer where you could, so thousands of people and hundreds of people would come to our booth. So it would be musicians, record companies, general public, and you could vote. You could put your 10, put your name in. And so we got hundreds, I guess, we did it 3 years running. So at 2 venues, that's 6 years. Yeah, it's a lot of votes. So it just grew and grew and grew and grew. Dare I say, like a forest fire. A dinner party book it was. um, and that's how it worked. And when we had to process it, my two great staff, Sue and Nick, brilliant, you know, just hundreds and hundreds of votes to compile, which we had on this. I think we did it in Excel or something quite simple, and count it with a counting mechanism. So it just worked.
Yeah.
And yes, you know, it was Revolver. It was, you know, it was
Yeah.
Abbey Road. It was Sergeant. I don't care what anybody says. You know, I had a bit of criticism. I did a lot of radio and promo for all those books, and a lot of those the presenters. I don't know if they were doing it deliberately, but they were a bit spiky towards me because oh no, not the Beatles again. And I had to keep saying, look, yes, I am the biggest Beatles fan in the world, but I didn't fiddle this at all. It's a fact.
Yeah.
You know, people did and still do, young and old. You know, even my grandchildren now, I can genuinely say, will be voting for Beatles albums, and it's just there when
Yeah.
something's that good. And Dylan's albums, you know, Blonde on Blonde, Blood on the Tracks, Highway 61,
Yeah.
they're always going to be in that top 10.
Of course.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
I don't understand where the argument would be because I can't, I mean, even my kids who I did not push my musical taste on at all. I let them go through their phases of, my daughter liking boy bands and my son listening to post-hardcore bands. I let him go through all those phases. And it's funny, they all came back to the Beatles and they all came back to, it's like you're coming home. It's like everybody's coming home to the same spot. They all get there to a different path, but I think everybody gets there.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
And if you want to go beyond, sorry, when I say beyond, I mean backwards. I mean that Beatles influence with some of that black R&B is significant because that, if you go back to the black R&B, the particularly the Motown stuff that they were doing, the early stuff, and some of that raw stuff that like Money and things like that, these R&B hits that weren't necessarily well known in the UK. The Beatles brought out the Isley Brothers' Twist and Shout, for example, is a classic, a classic example of that. The Chuck Berry stuff they did. So the Beatles even then, I mean, I was blessed because I was listening to Chuck Berry in the fairground in the mid-50s. So I was, Mr. Clever Clogs, but people in 62, 63 would go back to Chuck Berry, go back to Smokey Robinson, the stuff that they were listening to. And then fingers crossed, you can go backwards even further. You go back to, I don't know, T-Bone Walker, go back to early B.B. King. And, you look at that world that's available for you there. It's just,
yeah.
And the Beatles and the Stones for blues, most definitely.
Yes.
The most important band that they taught me. I mean, I'd have never heard of John Lee Hooker, Muddy Waters, Jimmy Reed. I'd have never heard these people had it not been for Keith and Mick.
What is your favorite, on a side note, what's your favorite Rolling Stones album?
The first album.
It is?
Shocking.
Mine's Aftermath, and I kind of get slack for that.
I absolutely love Aftermath.
Because people want, everybody wants to play it safe and say, Let It Bleed or, Beggar's Banquet or something, right down the line.
Oh, that's wonderful. The reason I say that is because, just to blow my own trumpet, is that my nephew has now, as he's got older, he's now got buying the vinyl albums and framing them, and he's got a room in his house. I think he's got 13 at the moment, and I just literally last month I said, "Would you like my Aftermath? Have you got Aftermath?" No, he said, "Oh, I'm going to get that." I said, "Tell you what," I sent it in the post to him. He was made up. So generous uncle, or whatever I am to him. Yeah. So he's now got Aftermath of my vinyl, my terribly scratched mono Aftermath, which of course was unplayable. But
Oh,
no, I love that first album, Route 66, Around and Around. I just thought that really changed my another changing moment. And I bought that first single. I bought "Come On" because it had a chuck. I mean, talk about inspiring. Historically, the A side was written by Chuck Berry, and the B side was written by Muddy Waters.
wow.
I Want to Be Loved was the B side. I mean, that was just. I didn't know the path until later, of course, but what a way to put the path to put me on to have that a little known Chuck Berry song and a little known Muddy Waters song, which of course we're all now familiar with. Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah,
But
I'm sorry I didn't mention the Stones earlier, but they were, particularly early on, they were pretty important. And the Yardbirds, I should have mentioned the Yardbirds.
yeah, I like oh, is it Rave Up with the Yardbirds? Is that
The Yardbirds is the one that
yeah,
seemed to,
yeah.
um, and that they're remarkable to have Clapton, Page, and Beck in the same band. That's ridiculous in its
So
own right.
of your top in the top thousand, I got to be sure that I'm not. I don't want to get out of this habit of saying it's your list because I know we're definitely telling everyone this is not your
It's
list.
my book.
This is
My
everybody
book.
else's list. It's your
I
pick.
will say it's my book, but it's not my list.
That's right. Is there an album that did not make that last edition that just breaks your heart? That
Yeah,
yeah, what's that one?
Qua by Yoma Kaukonen.
What's it called
Qua.
again?
Qua. Quah.
Qua.
And Jorma Kaukonen, was the lead guitarist of the Jefferson Airplane, and he was also the leader with Jack Cassidy of Hot Tuna. Both, if you haven't investigated, both should be investigated. Early Airplane, Crown of Creation, best album. Hot Tuna, America's Choice, maybe, or Burgers. And Jorma, to this day, he's still alive and well. He's a wonderful fingerstyle blues guitarist.
Mm,
And this album called Qua, again, is another little critic's choice, but not enough critics, if you see what I mean.
yeah.
Not many. There's one track called Genesis. It's such a beautiful song. And the other one is They Gave Me Money. I forgot what it's called. Song for the North Star. Okay. So two for your listening this. Song for the North Star and Genesis. Two beautiful songs by Jorma Kaukonen, who in those days had a great voice. And yeah, that was that pains me that the rest of the world never did catch up. It was only my journalist mates on Zigzag magazine or a couple of people at Melody Maker,
There's something I want to talk about, and then I want to talk about what some of the things that you're working on now. Is it's funny that now it's a running joke is that I'm not a fan of Elvis Presley at all. For some reason I'm just not it. I just can't get into anything of his, and some of it's personal because my mom would tell me. She told me some stories about him, that she had met him a couple times and it wasn't good. It wasn't a good adventure for her or whatever. And so that kind of probably shaped me a little bit. But now, of course, everybody plays jokes on me all the time. They're constantly buying me things that are like Elvis related or, animals that are dressed like Elvis and crazy things. But that's the one artist that people can't believe that I just can't stand. And I've given him the college try.
Do you know about me and my Elvis problem? Are you?
No, no.
I mean, this is so. Brian, what you're saying is uncanny because I have been quite outspoken on radio over many years in explaining why I never got Elvis. I never got Elvis. I was Little Richard, I was Buddy Holly, and I was Everly Brothers and Chuck Berry. I never got Elvis. And then, even when I didn't get Elvis, I was listening to some of those okay songs. when Elvis went down the toilet, as John says, as John Lennon says, you know, Elvis died when he went in the army. You know, that may sound flippant from John, but I actually completely and totally agree. Elvis, for me, went down the toilet when he joined the army. Those dreadful, dreadful, dreadful songs. And the reason why it's sort of strangely close to my heart is that before I sold my company to the American company, when we were trying to put out the encyclopedia, we were running out. I was running out of money, and I had to sell 45, I think, or 55% of my company to stop me going out of business, because we contractually had to finish the books with our Guinness contract. And I was blessed in meeting a man who's to this day one of my very best friends. He introduced me to a legend, a man called Freddie Beanstalk. Now, Freddie Beanstalk ended up owning and starting the music publishing company called Colin Music, which became one of the biggest independent music publishing companies, full stop, until it was sold to Chappell, and then it went to Warner's. Freddie was a multimillionaire. Freddie became my business partner. He came along, he looked at my plan, he saw that I was in trouble, he could see that I was a fairly decent young man, and he made a killing, of course. He bought a big chunk of me for next to nothing, but actually saved my life. The interesting thing is that Freddie Beanstalk made his millions as, in the early days, he was the runner for Colonel Tom Parker. And Freddie had all, there's a book there one day, and maybe if I ever get round to it, it's a fascinating book, because all those shockingly bad, dreadful songs from those movies, and boy, were they bad.
They were bad.
They were possibly beyond bad. Was down to Freddie Beanstalk, backwards and forwards with these songs. And Colonel Tom was just giving them to Elvis. And Elvis was such a pussy that he just recorded what he just did as he was told. He never stuck by his principles that he had when he was a teenager of liking black blues and rhythm and blues. He went totally the other way and recorded, as you know, I mean, don't even, you know. And if we get a request for an Elvis gig, I just look at, particularly my friend Melanie, and I just give her the look.
Yeah, I'm glad you feel the same way.
We don't do Elvis songs, and I'm blessed really because my wife, she can't stand Elvis either. I mean, they're almost divorceable moments as well. You know, if my wife didn't love the Beatles, Bob Dylan, but loved Elvis,
you'd have some problems.
There would be some serious problems.
Oh, that's so funny. I do want to give you an opportunity to talk about. I mean, I was looking at your website and I was like getting excited because I saw that you're currently working on top 1,000 albums to take to your grave.
Well, yeah, I'm doing my top 1,000 albums.
Yeah.
Okay. It's gonna, it will be for people of a certain age, because I am of a certain age now myself. Obviously, a lot older than you, but I hope to still be around in a few years. It will be, in my own little way, it will be mentioning those albums that I touched on earlier, and I will be listing the 1,000. It's very broad. It's very there. You know, there'll be reggae and there will be a jazz and there'll be some country, but there'll be a lot of blues and a lot of R&B and a lot of, I guess we call it rock. There won't be much metal in there. But yeah, so I've been working on it for a very long time. It needs descriptions, like we had, you know.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe. And I'll put it out. I mean, I'm not seeking advances from publishers now, which are the other one I finished. I'm really disappointed with because I took time out at the beginning of last year from the band to finish this because it'd been hanging around for so many years, and so many people said, "Oh, you've got to finish this." This phonographic memory,
Yeah.
um, which is an it's an autobiography, but it isn't about me. If you see what I mean, it's an autobiographical journey through my life in music. So I'm writing about music only. I'm not touching on any me bits. I'm
So
not
like a
interested.
soundtrack of your life almost.
Soundtrack. It really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
And I do have this OCD, some kind of, I don't know, ADHD, OCD. I can remember when I heard that song. I can still remember where I heard Kathy's Clown. I can remember where I heard Memphis Minnie, Kissing in the Dark. It was on the fairground. I can remember hearing Hank Williams on the fairground, and I was 3 years of age. Move it on over. Uh, so I do have this. I was never really able to say that in Encyclopedia, touching on Elvis in particular. I couldn't write in the Encyclopedia of Popular Music that I just thought Elvis was just overblown creep. I mean, I just didn't like the man. Sorry. Yes, he did. He was handsome and he had a great voice, but I couldn't put that encyclopedia out to be responsible. So there were my colleagues, also knocking it into shape. But with this little baby, I probably won't even mention it, Elvis, much. But this book has stalled because I sent it to a writer friend of mine who used to work for me. He writes beautifully about jazz, and he writes hip hop. He was one of the leading hip hop writers in Britain. He's become a good friend of mine, and he hit the nail on the head because I'm covering the decades. It's from 1950, when I would have been a month old, to the last day of 1999, i.e. the first day of 2000. So it's 50 years. So we've got those 5 decades, and I know my favourite decades. Of the 5, so number 1 would be the 60s. Number 2 would be the 90s.
Glad to hear it.
Number 3 would be the 70s. Number 4 would be the 50s. And number 5 would be the 80s. Therefore, the shortest part of the book is the 80s. And I guess some negativity crept in there because I got divorced then. My first son became sick. It was a pretty darkish decade, although there were happy things happening as well. I had 3 other children during that decade. But I think the music, I just didn't like it. I lost touch with music in the 80s. Maybe because I was bringing up kids and I had a sick child to look after. I don't know. But for whatever reason is that my 80s spiel came out quite negative, really. That I was mentioning those plinky plonky pianos and drums, the Phil Collins,
right?
Those horrible syndrome things. I mean, to see orchestral movers, OMD, orchestral movers in the dark, on stage with 2 giant tape recorders, a keyboard, and no guitar and no drum. To me, that's not right. That's just not right. And I think it came across. So I've got to expand and rewrite the 80s because, as my colleague pointed out to me, he said, you did love stuff in the 80s. Yeah, and I did. I thought, as I mentioned before, Pretenders were just fantastic. Elvis Costello was writing Joe Jackson. These people were doing,
there were a lot of good,
Oh, there was a hell of a lot of good stuff around.
Yeah.
so that's taken time. Sadly, the three publishers that I wrote to, they didn't either. They didn't get my letter, or they didn't even write back. So for the first time in my life, I haven't got a publisher lined up because my two agents have retired. That's the pain of being old, Brian. You know, there's agents who are even older than me, and they've retired, and they've passed me on to a couple of other names. But yeah, it's a different world. Um, and the other book that I finished, which has not been published, years and years ago, I was introduced to a fantastic man, a great songwriter called Will Jennings. And Will, apart from writing Love Lift Us Up Where We Belong and My Heart Goes On for
he wrote that.
yeah, like that, and Street Life for Randy Crawford, right? Apart
Right.
from writing these songs, uh,
Well, he's just living large on residuals.
these weren't the songs that attracted me to Will. When I found out that he'd written with Roy Orbison, he became mates with Roy Orbison, you know, and he wrote loads of tracks for B.B. King. But the key to the door here was through a mutual friend, my passion for Steve Winwood, which started, you know, when he's the same age as me, uh, when he was with the Spencer Davis Group. I just followed him through my life, and his Traffic I thought were just magnificent, and still are one of the greatest bands that Britain ever produced. And Steve Winwood's solo work, with
Yeah.
huge success that he had. Well, 5 of those solo albums, were written with Will. Will wrote the lyrics, and Steve wrote the music, and they became the record companies put them together. Will came over from Texas and became really close with Steve. So through this mutual friend, he said, Will, because he worked for a music publisher, said, Will's coming over, Will Jennings. I said, oh, really? I'd love to meet him. He said, I'll fix it up. And he fixed it up. So I met Will, and we went to Pizza Express, and we really hit it off because the lyrics that I know that he wrote with Steve Winwood, because I was such a big Winwood fan. So we really clicked. Went back to his hotel room. He played me some songs that he was working on, and I think we'd got through about 2.5 bottles of wine. And I remember trying to get home on the train that night to my family. I'll never forget. Anyway, we kept in touch, and yeah, we liked each other. And lo and behold, many years later, out of the blue, I get an email from somebody must be his PA, a guy, who said that Will is unable to contact you at the moment as he's had a stroke, but he's been thinking about a biography, an autobiography. He said there's only one person that he considers could do it justice, is little old me, which was very flattering. So I did it, and you know, I don't know if they call it vanity. I think they do call it vanity. But Will paid me, and he paid me handsomely. But in doing it, I mean, I had a fantastic time. I got to interview all these people, and Steve as well. You know, who was Steve Winwood. I mean, here we go, chatting to him for a couple of hours. Just
That's amazing.
one of the highlights of my life, I tell you, because I'd never interviewed him before in the old days. And I was speaking to Richard Kerr and Rodney Crowell, all the people that he'd worked with, Joe Sample. Roy Orbison had died, sadly. Anyway, it was a fantastic project to work on. And then we found out that Will hadn't had a stroke. He had Alzheimer's, and he then moved from his home. He lived in on the west coast, that very expensive part, Santa Barbara or somewhere, beautiful part of the world. and then he moved back. He had to be taken in care by his sisters back in Texas, and they are God-fearing women, the two sisters, who had never married, but no blasphemy, no sex, and unfortunately, my book contained. I mean, it wasn't a sex novel; it was a
Right.
music biography, but sex, drugs, and rock and roll did come into it, and the sisters opposed it. The solicitor, sorry, the music lawyer who handled Will's affairs, Charles Sussman, was very supportive. He wanted it to come out, but the estate of Will died about a year ago. So the book is finished. I've got it.
But
Maybe
that's I mean, I look at it like that's his echo through time that somebody's denying happening, and that's just tragedy because he definitely, I mean, it was the sounds of his life that he wanted to be heard, and yet it's being denied, you know.
It's so important, and even there is a popular angle to it because some of those songs that I mentioned earlier. I mean, his wealth is considerable. I know his earnings are phenomenal. Still to this day, his estate are collecting
Of
millions.
course, yeah,
Yeah, he wrote Higher Love. He wrote Roll With It. He wrote all these songs,
yeah,
back in the High Life. These fantastic songs, all
massive
written by
hits. They're all massive hits in the 80s.
massive hits,
Yeah,
written by Will. So there you go.
and I have
Um,
Back in the High Life down there. Yeah, on an
yeah,
album. Yeah, I mean,
yeah. And so many the stories that Will was able to tell me about working with B.B. King, with Roy Orbison, and all these people, and private stuff. His opinion on other people that he worked with for these huge hits, and of course his very high opinion of Steve, who is exactly the person that we think he is. He's a great, decent, fabulous, talented man.
nice.
Um, so yeah, that was a real sad one. So there are the three, but right now, Brian, the band, my band,
Yeah,
our band, yeah, we did about 40 gigs last year. We got 24, I think, 24 booked this year, and we're doing our covers. We're doing unusual covers.
yeah.
We're not doing karaoke stuff.
Oh yeah. If I when I walk into a place, an establishment, and if there's a band playing and I hear old time rock and roll, I get up and leave. I don't care if I'm in the middle of my meal. I'm done. I'm sorry. I can't listen to those same five songs that every cover band wants to play. I can't do it. So I was like, I'm out.
Yeah,
And my
yeah,
wife, she gets upset. She goes, "What? Yo, let's go over here. This band's playing." I go, "I'm not interested in seeing cover bands that play that same stuff, and they're playing. It's all safe stuff. If I walk in there and they're doing something that's interesting, that band that like if they're doing something from the Replacements or something, that would be interesting to me. But they're not. They're doing the same Led Zeppelin songs, or they're doing the same Leonard Skinner songs, and I'm just not interested in that.
I know what you mean. I mean, sadly, my bandmates do insist that I have to do a few shouty songs at the end. I mean, Mustang Sally does come into the proceedings
Right.
occasionally, but we do. We think. I think we do some really interesting covers from right into the 80s and 90s. Really,
Nice.
a couple of Lucinda Williams even, but. Yeah, so that's taking a lot of my time at the moment.
Yeah.
But I still do. I still do reviews. People ask me still, and I still do radio. Um, various around Britain, Essex, and down here, and in Wales for some. I don't know why. BBC Wales. Let- It's usually, sadly, I'm at that age. I only do obituaries now. Uh, I know. I mean, I knew when somebody dies, I know 6 o'clock in the morning that phone is going to ring, and I'll
Yeah,
be wheeled in, to do it now, and it's gonna carry on happening. I'm afraid. I mean,
yeah,
Keith Richards ain't gonna live forever. I don't know what I will do if I can't imagine. And I know this sounds a bit corny. I can't imagine Dylan not being alive. I think
that would,
Dylan. I do think Keith Richard is going to die one day. I'm not one of those, but I cannot imagine Dylan dying. It's bizarre. I know it's silly,
yeah,
um, but that's the one that I think is really going to knock me side. When Crosby died, David Crosby, who I loved dearly, and I had my ups and downs with David over a few
mhm,
years. Sometimes we'd have a big falling out, and then we'd have and he'd be so lovely to, on the phone interviews and stuff. Um, Erratic, I think we call David. That really knocked me sideways. But I think when Dylan goes, I know it's going to give me some work on the radio.
yeah,
But yeah, that's a big one.
yeah. That'd be huge for me too, considering
Yeah.
he's right up there for me for sure as a hero for what I get to do. I really appreciate you doing this, Colin.
Oh, it's fun.
I mean,
Allow
I've got
me to just sound off and talk has been just beautiful.
I know, and and there's so many. I mean, there's a thousand stories you could probably still tell me, and it's like it's just so interesting to me, that someone likes, loves music as much as you do, and that they're out and you're out there, and I like touching base with people like you. You know what I mean. I could carry on conversations with you forever about probably a vast array of things, and
Well, think of another subject one day, and I'm happy to do it if you
yeah,
come
if
up
we
with.
want to if we want to really focus in on just maybe one particular subject one time, maybe we'll do that.
I'd be very happy to do it. I mean, yes, I know I'm chatting away, but there's the hidden agenda is if I can. I've had so many over the years. When you get an email from somebody that you've recommended an album, or through what I've written, they've
Hmm.
come across an album. That to me is the most rewarding thing, when that comes back. So in this sort of propaganda war of me pushing all this stuff,
Yeah.
not pushing Elvis Presley, um,
Well,
that's the reward that I get. That's the
I'm
reward.
currently at 880 of that top 1,000.
That's extraordinary. I think you should make more of that, because that alone, that alone, when you get to 1,000, you're going to have to do some self publicity there, Brian, because
Yeah, I'm
I
hoping I
really
can.
I take my hat.
I've conquered Rolling Stone's latest top 500. I've conquered Enemies a long time ago. It's funny. That was the quickest one to do because it lined up with what I already had taste in, the alternative rock scene of the 90s. It lined up perfectly, and I could blow right through that list like it was nothing.
No, I am so impressed. I mean, over the way you've been contacting me over the years, you carry on. You're up to number 320. You're up to 460,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking, this guy, what? He's going on and on and on, and he's going to do it. I think it really. I mean, I wasn't as tolerant as you in a way, because I had to listen to so much metal, and I did find that, hurt my. That really was
Right. Yeah.
good, and some of that bad country that I had to listen to. Wow,
Yeah, I
some
got
bad.
country music kind of hit a lull in the late 90s with this pop country Shania Twain era of, safe
Yeah,
pop songs is what they were. I mean, they weren't really country songs.
no, I found that. But no, I take my hat off to you. Well done. Well
Thank,
done. And your
thank you.
list, by the way, I think you sent me 18. You're 18. There's not, yeah, it's pretty good. That's pretty damn good.
Yeah,
Um,
I appreciate it.
I
But
was thrilled to see the zombies in there. I really was. Yeah. Anybody who puts Odyssey and Oracle in their top 18,
I,
Well
I
done.
appreciate you doing this, Colin.
Thank you.
I'm
Really
gonna,
enjoyed it.
yeah, I'm gonna
Great.
stop us right here. We can talk a little bit more when we're off screen here, but again, I'm gonna put links to your website down below,
Sure.
and anything else that you think maybe you would like mentioned. Can you just send me an email, and I'll make sure that it's in the description of the video down below. I'll throw up some graphics of things that we talked about specifically, especially like maybe Elvis with a big, X through him or something like that. But thanks everybody for watching, and if you get a chance, check out Colin's website. He does really great stuff on there, and I loved his book. It's the all time top 1,000 albums. I think that if you ever want to dive into music, that's a list to start with, and I think everyone could benefit from that. So everybody, take care, and I'll talk to everybody next time. Bye bye.